Good afternoon, everybody. We'll give it a couple minutes to see who else signs on, and then we'll get going. Okie dokie. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If other people sign on, great. If not, we'll work it out. So first thing I'm going to do, although you hopefully have had a chance to look this over, is just screen share our syllabus so that we can go over everything. Hang on just a sec. For some bizarre reason, Zoom doesn't want to share it. So let me try resharing here. Aha. Okay. So really all that changed is the due dates. I changed the due date for your questions for your interviewee to this coming Thursday instead of last Thursday. I did see some of you did turn them in already. But I was going to wait and grade them all at once. If you're planning to interview your person sooner rather than later, just let me know. Then I can get you feedback sooner than this weekend. Alrighty. So we're about a week behind, but that's okay because some of the stuff at the end of the semester I had given much more time than I typically spend. So it'll be fine. So today and Thursday, we're going to do eyewitness testimony and the science related to eyewitness testimony. And then we're going to do detecting deception. We'll do criminal assessment and civil assessment. Your midterm doesn't cover anything that got bumped. So y'all are all good with that. Then we'll do preparing for trials, can be a much shorter lecture, jurors and juries. And then impact on victims, we'll talk about traditional, non-traditional prosecution, sentencing, and corrections. I kept all the other deadlines the same. And so, for example, a week from today, 2 weeks from today, your midterm report for your service learning project is due. And that will, for some of you, be, I'm just getting set up with my site, and that's okay. It's just a checkpoint. Our student presentations will still be at our exam time. Basically, we're just letting stuff breathe in terms of what we're covering when. All right, any questions on the revisions to the syllabus? I tried to make it pretty straightforward. All righty. So the first thing we are going to do today is actually watch a video, and it's not an episode of a TV show. It's actually a report from 60 Minutes about a actually somewhat famous case of eyewitness testimony. So I am going to go ahead and share this screen. Make sure y'all will be able to hear the sound. And unfortunately, it doesn't have captions because it's an older clip. So I apologize for that. But we will watch this And then you will have a group assignment about it. So just kind of pay attention.
It's a cliche of courtroom dramas. That moment when the eyewitness is asked, "Do you see the person who committed the crime here in this courtroom before you?" Well, it happens in real courtrooms all the time. And to jurors, that point of the finger by a confident witness is about as damning as evidence can get. But there is one type of evidence that's even more persuasive, and that, of course, is DNA. There have been 233 people exonerated by DNA in this country, and now a stunning pattern has emerged. More than 3/4 of them were sent to prison, at least in part, because an eyewitness pointed a finger, an eyewitness who we now know was wrong. It was hot and humid in Burlington, North Carolina on the night of July 28, 1984. Jennifer Thompson, then a 22-year-old college student, had gone to bed early in her off-campus apartment. As she slept, a man shattered the light bulb near her back door, cut her phone line, and broke in.
I remember kind of waking up and turning my head to the side and saying, "Who's there? Who is it?" And I saw the top of someone's head kind of sliding beside my mattress. And I screamed, and I felt a blade go to my throat.
A knife?
A knife. And he told me to shut up or he was going to kill me.
Her first thought was to offer him anything she had to go away.
"You can have my credit card, you can have my wallet, you can have anything in the apartment, you can have my car." And he looked at me and said, "I don't want your money." And I knew what was getting ready to happen.
She vowed to stay alert and study him so that if she lived, she could help put him away forever.
What is his voice? Does he have an accent? Does he have a scar? Is there a tattoo?
He's raping you and you're studying his face.
It was just trying to pay attention to a detail that if I survived, and that was my plan, I'd be able to help the police catch him.
After about half an hour, Jennifer tricked the rapist into letting her get up and fix him a drink, and she ran out the back door. He fled and raped a second woman half a mile away. Detective Mike Galden met Jennifer at the hospital.
The first comment I remember her making was that, "I'm going to get this guy that did this to me." She said, "I took the time to look at him. I will be able to identify him if I'm given an opportunity."
Detective Galden worked with Jennifer to make a composite sketch, poring over eyes, noses, ears, lips, trying to recreate the face she had seen that night. The sketch went out, and tips started coming in. One of those tips was about a young man named Ronald Cotton, who worked at a restaurant near the scene of both rapes and had a record, a guilty plea to breaking and entering, and as a teenager to sexual assault. 3 days after the rape, Mike Galden called Jennifer in to do a photo lineup. He laid these 6 pictures down on the table, said the perpetrator may or may not be one of them, and told her to take her time.
Does she say immediately, "That's him"?
No, she studied each photograph.
I can remember almost feeling like I was at an SAT test. You know, where you start narrowing down your choices. You can discount A and B and...
Oh, like multiple choice.
Exactly.
According to the police report, Jennifer studied the pictures for 5 minutes.
She picked up Ron's photograph and said, "That's the man that raped me."
And you must have said, "Are you sure?" And she said yes?
Yeah, oh yes, certainly.
Ronald Cotton heard the news from his mother's boyfriend.
He told me, he said, "Ron," he said, "the police are looking for you." And I said, "For what?" He told me, "For rape." I said, "Man, I didn't commit such a crime like that."
Did you panic?
I didn't panic. I'm trying to figure out, why.
He comes in and gives me a very detailed account of where he was, who he was with that night. As it turns out, that was a false alibi.
I realized later that I had got my weekends confused, and so therefore, I gave them the reason to think that I was lying.
This was August 1st, 1984.
Right.
You go in to clear yourself. When did you actually leave?
I didn't.
He was locked up and days later put in a physical lineup.
I'm number 5.
You scared?
I was very scared, nervous. I was so nervous. I was trembling. I felt my body just shaking.
They were asked to step forward, speak, and step back.
I can remember looking to the detective and saying, it's between 4 and 5, can I have them do it again?
And then she knew it was number 5, Ronald Cotton.
Did you feel absolutely certain?
Absolutely certain.
Did anybody say to you, good job?
Well, what was said to me afterwards was, that's the same person you picked out in the photo lineup. So in my mind, I thought, bingo, I did it right. I did it right.
In a week-long trial, the jury heard about Ronald Cotton's faulty alibi, his clothing that matched Jennifer's description, and a piece of foam found on her floor that seemed to come from one of his shoes. And most powerfully, they heard from Jennifer.
When they ask you, do you recognize the man who did this to you? Did you point to him? It was
Absolutely.
Ron Cotton.
It was Ronald Cotton.
She called my name, pointing a finger, and that's all it takes, it seemed like.
What did that feel like?
It felt like someone pushing a knife through me.
It took the jury just 40 minutes. The verdict, guilty on all counts.
He was sentenced to life and 50 years. And it was for me that moment that you know the justice system works. Because I am the victim, and he's a horrible person, and he will never, ever be free again.
Ronald Cotton was handcuffed, shackled, and taken to North Carolina's Central Prison. He was 22 years old.
You know, they say grown men doesn't cry, but it's a lie. You know, I grabbed my pillow many times and hugged it, wishing I was hugging my mom, my dad, sister, brother. I wish it didn't have to be this way.
He started working in the prison kitchen, singing in the choir, and writing letter after letter to his attorneys, hoping to get a new trial. Then one day, as he watched a new inmate being brought in, he had a strange feeling.
I said, excuse me. I said, you look familiar. I said, where are you from? He said, I'm from Burlington. I said, I am too. I said, you kind of resemble the drawing of a suspect in a crime of which I'm falsely in prison for. Did you commit this crime? And he told me, no, he did not.
Wait a sec, you saw him and thought of that composite drawing?
Mm-hmm.
His name was Bobby Poole, and he was in for rape. He started working in the prison kitchen, too.
And the stewardess were calling me Pooh instead of Cotton.
They were calling you by his name?
Yes.
In other words, people were mistaking the two of you.
Yes, exactly.
Then a fellow inmate told him that he'd heard Bobby Poole admit to raping Jennifer and the other woman that night. Ronald Cotton won a new trial, and his lawyers called Bobby Poole to the stand with Jennifer sitting right there. It was the moment Ronald Cotton had been hoping for.
Bobby Poole is in the courtroom. You look over there. What happens inside you?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. As a matter of fact, the strongest emotion I felt was anger at the defense. Because I thought, how dare you? How dare you question me? How dare you try to paint me as someone who could possibly have forgotten what my rapist looked like? I mean, the one person you would never forget? How dare you?
Ronald Cotton was convicted again, this time given 2 life sentences. Back in prison 7 years later, he and everyone else was riveted by a big news story, the trial of O.J. Simpson.
I would get my radio, put my earplugs, and go outside, sit in a corner.
And listen to the trial.
Yes.
He was intrigued by something he had never heard of, DNA. He wrote to his new attorney, law professor Rich Rosen. Rosen warned him that there probably wasn't any evidence left to test, and if there was, DNA could cut both ways.
Understand, if the DNA comes back and shows that you did this crime, whatever legal issues we have don't make any bit of difference. You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison.
He warned you that if it comes up positive, you're sunk.
I told him to put his foot down and go with it.
Packed away on the shelves of the Burlington Police Department was 10-year-old evidence from the 2 rapes that night. Inside one of the rape kits was a fragment of a single sperm with viable DNA. It proved what Ronald Cotton had been saying all along. He was innocent, and the rapist was Bobby Poole. Within days, Ronald Cotton was back in court.
You are walking out here today as a free man.
This time to be released.
So not only do you find out that Ron didn't do the crime. You find out Bobby Poole did.
It was just utter shock, really, disbelief. I mean, by this time, this is 11 years later. And, you know, I know that I've been involved in a case where a man's lost 11 years of his life. And I was so sad for him and his family.
In the years since Ronald Cotton's conviction, Jennifer had married and had children.
Are you the one that tells her?
Yes. Her reaction, no, it can't be true. It's not possible, you know. I know Ronald Cotton raped me. There's no question in my mind.
It was like someone had just taken my life and like turned it upside down.
She cried?
Oh, she cried. She broke down. I mean, she took it all on herself. You know, the guilt. You know, I did this to that man.
Shame?
Shame, terrible shame. A suffocating, debilitating shame.
But when she thought or dreamed about that night, it was still Ronald Cotton's face she saw. To get past it, she asked if he would meet with her at a local church.
I remember him walking into the church, and I physically could not stand up.
She was nervous, scared.
I started to cry immediately, and I looked at him and I said, Ron, if I spent every second of every minute, every hour for the rest of my life telling you how sorry I am, it wouldn't come close to how my heart feels. I'm so sorry. And Ronald just leaned down, he took my hands.
Oh, gosh.
And he looked at me, he said, I forgive you.
I told her, I said, Jennifer, I forgive you. I don't want you to look over your shoulder. That I just want us to be happy and move on in life.
The minute he forgave me, it's like my heart physically started to heal. And I thought, this is what grace and mercy is all about. This is what they teach you in church that none of us ever get. And here was this man that I had hated I used to pray every day of my life during those 11 years that he would die, that he would be raped in prison and someone would kill him in prison. That was my prayer to God. And here was this man who, with grace and mercy, just forgave me.
That is overwhelming. It's overwhelming.
How wrong I was and how good he is.
How is it that Jennifer could have studied her rapist so carefully and still made this mistake? And how could she have failed to recognize Bobby Poole, the actual rapist, when he sat right in front of her in the courtroom 3 years later? That part of the story when we come back. Now that DNA has exonerated more than 230 men, mostly in sex crimes and murder cases, criminologists have been able to go back and study what went wrong in those investigations. What they've honed in on is faulty eyewitness testimony. Over 75% of these innocent men were convicted in part because an eyewitness fingered the wrong person. At the heart of the problem is the fragility of memory. As one researcher told us, we now know that memory is not like a videotape recorder. You don't just record an event and play it back. Instead, memory is malleable, full of holes, easily contaminated and susceptible to suggestion, as in the case of Jennifer Thompson and Ronald Cotton. Before this case, did you think that there were a lot of innocent people put away?
No.
You didn't?
No, I didn't. Innocent people aren't convicted of crimes they didn't commit. I believe that.
What do you think now?
Oh, I know better. I mean, well over 200 cases nationally. We've had a half dozen in this state alone. The first, of course, was my case.
Hallelujah! And as these innocent men have been freed in one state after the next, we've learned something else, that in all the cases where eyewitnesses were wrong, the real perpetrator was not in the initial lineup.
When you're sitting in front of a photo lineup, you just assume one of these guys is the suspect. It's my job to find it.
And Jennifer did her job. She found the suspect's photo. Problem is, the suspect, Ronald Cotton, was not the rapist.
Bobby Poole's photograph was not in the photo lineup.
Right.
He was not in the physical lineup.
When the real perpetrator is not in the set, is none of them, Witnesses have a very difficult time being able to recognize that.
Gary Wells, a professor of psychology at Iowa State University, has been studying eyewitness memory for 30 years. He says when the real guy isn't there, witnesses tend to pick the person who looks most like him.
I think that Ronald Cotton and Bobby Poole look very much alike. They have very similar lips, shape of their eyes, their eyebrows kind of go up in a look of surprise.
Yes. Without him in the lineup, Ronald Cotton was the one who was in jeopardy.
Wells says eyewitness testimony has two key properties. One, it's often unreliable, and two, it is highly persuasive to jurors.
I can see why it's so persuasive. Someone says, I was there. You'd believe that person.
You believe that person because they have no reason to lie.
Yeah.
The legal system is set up to kind of sort between liars and truth tellers, and it's actually pretty good at that. But when someone is genuinely mistaken, the legal system doesn't really know how to deal with that, and we're talking about a genuine error here.
He walked us through what went wrong, some of it counterintuitive. When Jennifer spent 5 minutes studying the photographs, she and Detective Galden thought she was being careful.
I didn't want to come across, I don't think, as somebody who was like, that's the one. I really wanted to be sure.
Wells says no good.
Recognition memory is actually quite rapid. So we find in our studies, for example, that if somebody's taking longer than 10, 15 seconds, it's quite likely that they're doing something other than just using a reliable recognition memory.
So you're saying if she really recognized the guy, it would have been almost instantaneous.
Quite quick, yes.
He says a better way would have been to show Jennifer lineup photos or people one at a time, so that she would compare each one directly to her memory rather than to one another. Wells showed me a study in which more than 300 subjects were shown deliberately shaky videotape of a simulated crime.
You look out a window and you see some suspicious behavior. What happens is we tell them later then, this person that you saw right there put a bomb down the air shaft there.
Then subjects are shown a lineup and asked to identify the bomber.
That would be so hard.
Very
I
difficult.
just saw it.
And of course, you're particularly cautious right now. You know now, after we've talked, probably not to pick anyone.
No, actually, I actually know who it is because if I had
who is
come
it?
upon that, I think it's this guy. Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
Yeah.
I'm wrong?
Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. And I'm already saying how hard it is.
It's none of them.
It's not.
And it's so, and you
Isn't
know
that
about
bizarre?
it. You know about this. We've talked about this. So this is the this is what makes it so
difficult. Look what you
difficult.
just did to me.
Yeah.
I'm mortified. I feel like Jennifer.
Wells says in real life, the mistake is often compounded by what happens next. Remember the seemingly innocent information Jennifer says she got from police after she picked Ronald Cotton out of the physical lineup?
That's the same person you picked out in the photo lineup. So in my mind, I thought, bingo, I did it right.
Wells studied what that reinforcement does. After half his subjects did what I did, picked an innocent person from this lineup, he told them nothing, then asked them questions about what they had seen. Very few felt highly confident about their choice.
Only about 4% are saying they had a great view, which is good because we gave them a lousy view. Only about 3% are saying they make out details of the face. That also is good because they really couldn't.
But he told a second group of subjects, after they made the same incorrect choices, good, you pick the suspect.
Now what happens is almost 45% of witnesses now report that they were positive or nearly positive. Notice that over 1/4 of them now say they had a great view. And
This is really what happened to Jennifer.
it is what happened with
Yeah.
Jennifer.
What this seems to be saying is that a reinforcement alters memory
It does.
dramatically.
It does.
He says the solution is to have someone independent administer the lineup, someone who doesn't even know who the suspect is, and certainly not the detective on the case.
You shouldn't have been there.
I shouldn't have been there.
No, but nobody did anything wrong. I mean, that was the
that was the
practice.
common practice
Yeah.
then. It was the tradition. It was how it was done then. Law enforcement wasn't schooled in memory. We weren't schooled in protecting memory. treating it like a crime scene, where you're very careful, methodical about what you do and how you use it. I mean, we weren't taught that in those days.
But none of these errors explains perhaps the most puzzling part of this story, how it is that Jennifer could see Bobby Poole in the courtroom and not realize her mistake.
You're looking into the face of the man who raped you, whose face you had studied so intently.
Yes.
And there's no flicker, nothing between you and Bobby Poole.
Nothing. I've gone back there many times trying to think, was there ever a moment? Did I ever look at him and think, and I didn't.
Elizabeth Loftus is a professor of psychology and law at the University of California, Irvine, and an expert in memory. She showed me an experiment she says might help explain Jennifer's mistake. She asked me to study these faces. Then, after a few minutes, she gave me a memory test.
Which of these two faces do you recognize?
Right.
Okay, you picked right.
Left.
You picked left.
And
Okay.
I said left, but I wasn't 100% sure. And then, the tricky part.
Oh. Well, I'll tell you why I'm stymied. Because I just picked this one on the left 2 seconds ago. But now I'm not sure, because those two look very much alike to me. But I'm going to tell you the left.
But I was wrong. It was the one on the right. Loftus explained how I had been duped.
You saw this face, then I gave you a test where I presented you with an altered face, along with a novel one. So I pretty much induce you to pick a wrong face because I don't even have the real guy there. It's an altered version. And later on, when you now have a choice between the altered one and the real one, you stuck with your altered left choice.
This is exactly what happened to Jennifer.
This can help us understand why Jennifer can be sitting in a courtroom and be looking at Bobby Poole, the original rapist, and looking at Ronald Cotton and saying, no, it's not Poole, it's Cotton, because she has been picking him all along.
I begin to wonder whether there should ever be eyewitness testimony in trials.
Well,
Because of the tricks that memory plays.
yeah. I think what's important, though, is to understand that, know it as a police officer, as an investigator, as attorneys.
We need eyewitnesses. I mean, if we couldn't convict based on an eyewitness, that's giving a lot of comfort to criminals. We have no choice. We have to find ways to make this evidence better.
And that's something Jennifer has tried to do ever since by telling her story to prosecutors, police, defense attorneys. And she's had some success. Her state, North Carolina, was the first in the country to mandate reforms by law, showing victims lineup photos one at a time and emphasizing that the right answer may be none of the above. Having lineups conducted by a person who doesn't know who the suspect is, or not by a person at all.
The person who committed the crime may or may not be included.
One system now used in a handful of cities is computer software Mike Galden helped develop to have a laptop conduct photo lineups.
Does this person look familiar to you?
But law professor Rich Rosen says that in the vast majority of places there's been no reform, and that needs to change.
This is something that police officers can and should be in favor of.
Because you're not getting the real guy off the street.
Yeah, Bobby Poole raped other women because they went after Ron Cotton. So Ron is not the only person who suffered from this mistake.
Ronald Cotton, now 47 years old, has worked hard to rebuild his life. He works the late shift in a factory. He's been married for 12 years and has a 10-year-old daughter. They live in a house paid for with money North Carolina paid him in restitution, $10,000 for each of the 11 years he spent in prison. When he can, he joins Jennifer in her campaign for reforms. One of the most amazing things to have come out of this miscarriage of justice is the most unlikely of friendships. Jennifer and Ron say they speak on the phone about once a week. They're families of friends. They say they have a shared bond that is hard for most people to fathom.
Have people ever met you for the first time when you're together and said kind of cheerily, hey, how did you two meet?
Yeah.
They
We do
have?
that on the airplane a lot.
Oh, yeah.
We're traveling. And I usually just go, you tell them.
Well, what do you say?
We would look at each other and laugh, and finally we go ahead
And tell them.
And they have recently co-authored a book in hopes that their story can inform and inspire others.
Today, when you think about what happened to you that night when you were 22 years old, whose face is there?
Nobody's.
Oh my.
That to me is one of the most beautiful things is I don't have a face. Bobby Poole's dead. I don't ever have to worry about him ever hurting another woman. He died in prison. And Ronald Cotton is my friend.
For more on how memories can be contaminated, go to 60.
All right, I have one more short video, and then we'll do the breakout groups. So let me pop this one over here. This is just another quick video about Loftus's research.
Can you go so far as to suggest an entire memory of something that never happened?
Chris is the subject of a false memory experiment. The Loftus researchers had several of his family members record in a journal some real events shared by the family. A false event, being lost in a shopping mall at the age of 5, was added to the journal, which Chris read and ultimately remembered as real.
I remember getting lost and I was crying, and I remember that day I was so scared I thought I'd never see my family again. I knew I was in real trouble. I remember the stores, baby. I sure remember the stores. An older man approached me. He was tall, and I don't know his age, but he was older. He had a flannel shirt on. I remember the flannel shirt. And I remember my mom told me never to do that again. And
Well, in terms of Chris's memory, there was no man, there was no flannel shirt, there was no mother who said, don't ever do this again.
Using deception in psychological research is a controversial but sometimes unavoidable practice. When the
Okay, that's going to get more into ethics. So I just wanted you to see a piece of what she does with her research. Stop share here. Yeah, I love everyone's comments about the title of the book. Yeah, hopefully they get into the racial elements. I'm not sure whether they do or not. Here we go. I didn't want to be distracting while that was on. I've never read it. Just watched the 60-minute clip. So there is a group assignment I'm going to have you all do. Let me make sure I have the link copied, and I'll throw it in the chat. And I will give you all 20 minutes, and then we'll come back together and chat through it, and then we'll sort of fill in the gaps on everything on Thursday with our lecture. So, but let me go ahead and make the breakout rooms. Oops, there we go. There'll be 4 people per room. And make sure all of our options are the way we want them. Yep. All right, so I'm going to open the rooms, and feel free to use the question mark to call me to your room if you need me, or you can always pop back into the main room. I will be here. Okie dokie. I think almost everyone's back. Just a couple more people we're waiting for. Sorry if your group was not quite finished. Just 2 of the 3 groups were, and when I looked at the Google Doc, everybody had answers for everything. So I was like, well, we could use that last time. So I called y'all back. Yeah. I answer emails while you guys are doing that, and I find my blue light glasses sort of save my eyes so they're not burning at the end of the day. So, alrighty. everybody's back. Hello, hello. Okay, so real quick before we get into the assignment, I just wanted to share a couple things with you. So I'm going to share screen here, make sure I'm finding the right window. There we go. Okay. So this is some data from the Innocence Project, which works to essentially exonerate people. Exactly what happened with Ronald Cotton. Like, go back to the DNA evidence and say, does this match with what happened? And so you'll see here, I think at the time of that report, they said there were like 320 people who had been exonerated. Now there's 375. Well, I think there was 220, sorry, at that time. When I first made these notes about 10 years ago, there were 270, so it's definitely growing, the number of people who are out. There are 375 exonerees, but the average number of years they served before they were exonerated is 14. So they're in there for a while. So the average age they went into prison was about 27. The average age they get out was 43. That's a huge chunk of your life, right? 21 of them actually served time on death row. Several of them pled guilty. We'll talk later in the semester why someone might plead guilty to something they didn't do. Almost 70% involved some sort of eyewitness misidentification. So this is common. This is super common. In other cases, forensic science was misapplied. There were false confessions. So we'll talk about confessions later in the semester as well. Only two, well, actually almost all of them. No, 100 less. Sorry, I'm still thinking of the old 270 number. So only 268 out of the 375 were compensated for the time they spent behind bars. And this is the one that got me. So 165 actual assailants identified. And so if they had not imprisoned the wrong person, right, if they had caught these actual people and put them behind bars, they would have saved an additional 154 violent crimes, including 83 sexual assaults, 36 murders, and 35 other violent crimes. This part sadly didn't shock me, but is still disheartening, right? That 60% of those who were wrongfully imprisoned for a crime they did not commit were African American. And we know that African Americans are a much smaller percentage of the US population than that. So very much overrepresented, and something that I know a couple of you commented on in the comments that, yeah, there's probably a racial component to a lot of these things, right? The other thing that I wanted to point out to you all is talking about the backlog of rape kits. So clearly at the time this crime was committed, testing rape kits wasn't a thing because DNA testing wasn't a thing yet, right? But it is actually, unfortunately, really common in the US for rape kits not to be tested. So let me see if this one had some of the stats of it. Basically, they just aren't tested. They don't have policies. They don't have training. They don't have resources. Here we go. I think this was the one that had some of the stats. So like in Virginia, there are now 0 untested kits because our governor made a big deal about this several years ago. Actually, I think it was our attorney general. But if you look at some place like Michigan, where I grew up, there are over 1,000 untested kits. Sadly, that's better than it was because at one point there were like 11,000 just sitting there. Texas has 2,000. So these are all potentially people who are, you know, out on the street and can do crimes again. So there are lots of reasons to test them. stopping serial rapists. Here's where I saw some of the stats on Detroit. So they've discovered 11,341 untested rape kits just in a storage facility. So they tested most of these by January of this year, but that took from 2009 till now. So, again, this is another 11 years someone could potentially have been on the street. So they found 2,600 DNA matches, including 824 serial rapists. So again, all these people could have been taken off the streets, right? And they talked about that with the other guy that Ron Cotton was mistaken for. So that's just my side note of statistics fun. And so let's go ahead and I'll just do a little bit of a shift this time just to keep things interesting. Group 1, why don't you start with question 3? So what do you think of Loftus's research? Did anything about it surprise you? So this is Sherelle, CJ, India, and Savasia.
Okay. So we found Loftus research very interesting because, well, I know for myself, when I was looking at the examples, I chose the wrong person. And like I said, it was due to the similarities from the lineups. And then Savasia also stated that Loftus explained that suggestions from outside parties can cause victims to create biased thoughts, which we also found very interesting and surprising.
I'm just muted. Even, memories of events that never happened, like her mall experiment, right? The human memory is pretty malleable, and we don't necessarily think of it like that. So this is one of the reasons why, like, if you bring people in who were witnesses to a crime, you're supposed to put them in different rooms and not let them talk to each other because their stories can change. All right, any other thoughts on that, group 1? Alrighty, well, let's move on to group 2. That's Annika, Erin, Greta, and Carly. And let's have you all talk about practical applications for Loftus's research beyond courtroom settings.
So we mainly kind of talked about like it in a school setting. So I know me and Annika like both had like personal like examples where like we would get mixed up with different people at school, or like teachers wouldn't recognize you, and we were just thinking like, so for my example, like I got mixed up with another boy in like my 4th grade class because he had long hair. From a distance and like from a side view, like we looked alike. So I think like that could be like taken into like a school setting, because like you're with these kids all day, like you may like not know their names, or like you may not have enough time to like, I guess, facial recognize them. So I just think like you could like place that in a school setting with like students and like teacher relationships, or like even coworker relationships.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I've told people before, I'm notoriously bad with names. I always feel bad about it. I know all the memory tricks. I'm just not great at it. So if anything could help me with that, that'd be good. And I am also notoriously bad for mixing up students who don't look anything alike, or just flat out calling people by the wrong name. I've done that before, and people were like, there's not even a Sarah in our class. Like, why'd you call her Sarah? So yeah, I think that that's a really great idea. Alrighty. Okay, so group 3, what do you think would be the best way to include eyewitness testimony in court if you had to do it?
So we were basically saying that the best way to do it is to let the jury know about the inaccuracy of eyewitness accounts. So since we all know now that memory can be suggestible and altered and malleable and all of this stuff, let the jury know, like, hey, it may not be 100% accurate. And an idea that came up was that somebody can say that somebody was at the crime, but maybe they're at the scene of the crime, but they were nowhere near the actual crime. So like maybe the crime was across the street and you notice somebody sitting at the cafe across from you, but they weren't actually across the street. So that was the biggest thing that we thought should be used in court.
Yeah, that's a huge issue. Let me see if I can find it real quick here. Yeah, 70% of these cases involved informants, or there were more obviously for the false eyewitnesses. But sometimes you have people who are like trying to cut a deal, and so they'll give information to the police. I don't know if anyone else watches Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, but this week his was on police raids. And so he posts the entire thing on YouTube. So if you don't have HBO Max, you can still watch it. Highly recommend. Really goes with a lot of the stuff we're talking about. Well, one of the things he talked about is like informants will just tell the police like, oh yeah, this person lives at this address, and they actually, don't live anywhere near there. And so then people get their homes like broken into, just on the word of this one person who's just trying to get off, or a lighter sentence for their crime. So yeah, I think there are a lot of issues here. Alrighty, group 4. What is your group's reaction to this case of Jennifer? And how was she so convinced that this wrong person attacked her?
I mean, there's the case in general was really, really disheartening, and I had told the other girls in the group that I had seen this before, and it's just, that's what happens so much and so often. And, and it especially sucks that the two men look so alike, like in the facial structure. If you kind of like block out part of their faces and put them beside each other, the chins are the same, the nose may be a little different, but the eyes are the same. And just everything about the case itself is just, it's disheartening, to see the similarities between them and how it could happen so easily. And the fact that it did, an innocent man got put away for so long and lost so much of his life because of it. And in the end, she feels terrible about it. Like that brought on so many other psychological issues for her and him.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, right? That there were so many things they did wrong. But again, they didn't have the science back then, right? But just the idea that, they were reinforcing her for the wrong answer, basically. So then she was even more convinced. So then in the future, she's not going to change her answer, right? Yeah, and it just kind of goes with the fact that, human memory isn't perfect. And in this case, it was hard, right? Because they did look so much alike. So if you're being told this guy is in the lineup, or that's how you're interpreting it, well, that guy looks the most like it. Yeah, I don't remember what the statistic is, but I remember a couple years ago it was a big thing, and there's like a website where you can go online and like try to find your doppelgangers worldwide, and everybody has like 2 or 3 or something like that, I think. I mean, this is a case of that, right? Like these guys could have been twins. So that makes it even trickier. And it was so interesting that Ron Cotton figured it out right away, right? When that guy came in from like, did you commit this crime that I'm in here for? Yeah.
And even in prison itself, they were confusing them. Like they're calling the other one. And I'm like, how does that happen?
Well, part of it is racial, right? We know that, unfortunately. And it looks like somebody is saying that in the comments. I realized during the video, they failed to mention how race can also have a play in how they remember others. Yes, this is exactly what I was just saying. The term all black / all white people look the same comes into play here. One of the members thought they looked like brothers. Other people think they look nothing alike in reality. That's no fault of anyone, since we can't control who or what we see. But I think overall it's important to take into account that race plays a big part in eyewitness testimony. Yeah, huge, said much more eloquently than I did. So kudos to that person. They just messaged me, otherwise I'd give them a shout out. But yeah, that race is a big issue, and I don't know any better way to say this. So, apologies for my lack of eloquence, but we still live in a very racist society, right? And so there's just sort of this gut of like, yeah, that was that person, right? And sometimes this is harmless or less harmful, right? We're not putting someone away. Certainly it's a microaggression, right? If you call someone by the wrong name just because they're racist, right? But it doesn't always put them behind bars. So I guess what I should say is this is always harmful to the people involved, but sometimes it's even more harmful. There's the words I wanted to use. I think of, for example, a guy I dated in college was one of our few African-American guys on campus. And we also had only, like Wesleyan, only a few African-American professors, and people would mistake him for the professor, and they honestly look nothing like different body type and whatever. So yeah, race is a big issue. Alrighty, group 5. Should eyewitness testimony be allowed in court? Why or why not?
We said yes, but under certain circumstances, no. It should be taken with a grain of salt, but still be admissible. This could be used as supporting evidence, but not main evidence for a case.
Yeah, and I mean, essentially what you all said is what happens, right? As far as I know, there's no one who has outlawed eyewitness testimony altogether. Certainly steps are taken when doing lineups, as you saw in the end of the video, to try to minimize bias or confirmation things. But as far as I know, everywhere eyewitness testimony is still admissible. Interestingly, so Elizabeth Loftus, in addition to doing her research, is actually a highly sought after and thus highly paid legal consultant, expert witness, there's the word I'm looking for, on issues of testimony. And so she, it's actually kind of controversial because she will come in and essentially, if you hire her, she will try to discredit whatever eyewitness testimony is on there. And so at times she has been called into and has testified in like child abuse cases and has argued like someone who's 18, you know, they're remembering this all wrong. So a lot of people who are advocates in that area criticize her because of that. And I don't think my heart hopes she's not being unethical. She thinks she's being ethical by just providing the facts. I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe she doesn't believe sexual assault victims. I don't know, which happens with people of all genders, unfortunately. But yeah, it's certainly, obviously, controversial. And obviously, also, that's only going to happen in cases where the person has a lot of money, right? Because you're hiring the best lawyers who know to get her, and then you're paying her for her time. And so this is another thing that I think we've hinted at in this class, but not talked about as directly, is the fact that people who are of minority status, whether that be race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, are much less likely to get the same treatment as people who are well off, not minorities, because they often don't have the resources. Yeah, Emily, this is a really good point that when listening to victims' accounts they've been through is traumatic and that can affect their memory. Yeah, when we talk about victims later in the semester, we're actually going to talk about what happens in your brain when you go through a trauma. So like in the moment when you're trying to process a trauma, your brain actually does a bunch of different stuff than it typically does that makes it harder to remember those things. Yeah, that's a really good point. And we have good ways now of trying to get interviews from those people that are reliable, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So does anyone have any other comments, questions, thoughts about this video? Yeah, I think, and having skimmed through all of your answers, you were all kind of on the same page that disheartening kind of is the word, right? That like, this is just awful to think about, and also awful to think that in at least 375 cases, something like this has happened, or at least 69 of those, right? So certainly this happens not infrequently, you know, probably not frequently, but there are probably still hundreds, if not thousands of people behind bars who did not commit the crime, or maybe any crime, right? But because of racial issues or just human memory issues or the combination of those things, right, they are serving this time. So, yeah. On Thursday, we will go through the lecture related to this to sort of fill in some of those gaps. But I thought that it was good to kind of start with as concrete example of it rather than, you know, we're going to talk a lot about theory and stages of memory and all that good stuff. So it's nice to see it in action first. So I will do my typical sticking around for a couple minutes in case anybody has questions. And if not, everybody have a good couple days and I will see you on Thursday.